Alright, today we're going to talk about triangle congruence and CPCTC, and we'll figure out what that means in just a minute. So let's go ahead and look at these two triangles. Let's go ahead and call this one ECV, and we'll call this one MRK. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that triangle ECV is congruent to triangle MRK. So remember that congruent means the same shape and same size. So when we look at that, that means that these two triangles, these sides, this side and this side, are congruent. This side and this side are congruent. And this side and this side are congruent. Now in geometry, we'll use our congruent marks. And so that means for these triangles, there's three pairs of congruent sides. We have segment EC is congruent to segment MR. We have segment CV is congruent to segment RK. And we have segment EV is congruent to MK. So when we know this, we know that the three sides are congruent. Well, and in a triangle, we also have angles to look at. And so now we know that angle E is going to be congruent to angle M. And we know that angle C is going to be congruent to angle R. And finally, we know that angle V is going to be congruent to angle K. And so we can now say that angle E is congruent to angle M. Angle C is congruent to angle R. And angle V is congruent to angle K. So here we have three sides. Here we have three angles. So when we have this statement that triangle ECV is congruent to triangle MRK, we know these six things. We have three pairs of congruent sides and three pairs of congruent angles. So if I want to show two triangles are congruent, I need to show that the three sides are congruent and the three angles are congruent. So I have six things that I'll need to show. Now a couple things to notice. Notice here, EC, MR, MR. Notice CV, RK, CV, RK. When we write our congruence statement, it has to match up, has to go in order. So EC has to correspond to MR. And so I can actually write all these statements without even drawing a picture. We'll look at one more thing. Notice, look at the angles. Angle V, angle K, angle V, angle K. So it all lines up. So this actually allows me, so let's look at another, this time we're not going to draw a picture, we're just going to have a statement. Let's do triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. And I want to know the three pairs of congruent sides. Okay, so what we do is we just look at this. We know that A and B are going to correspond with X and Y, and so we can just say segment AB is congruent to segment xy, and continue that. Let's look at, underline it here, BC and YZ. So segment BC is congruent to segment YZ, and finally, now this one and this one, so we get all three sides. AC is congruent to XZ. And now the angles. The angles are the easy one, because it's just the first with the first, the second with the second, and the third with the third. So look, take the first, A, congruent to the first, angle X. The second, angle B. The second, angle Y. And the third, angle C, is congruent to the third, angle Z. All right, so let's do one last example here. Triangle WHY is going to be congruent to triangle CAT. So let's go ahead and draw a example. WHY and CAT, and I'm going to say give us a little bit of information here. Okay, so using these this example, these triangles, since I said they're congruent, that means I know a lot of information. That means that I know that this side is going to correspond with this side. That's because the WH corresponds to the CA. That means that this side will correspond with this side. Now, when we did the last one, the yellow, there was no numbers, so I didn't have any extra information. But now when I did the green, the HY, segment HY and segment AT, notice that since this is 10, since that is 10, I clicked on the wrong one, there we go. Since segment AT is 10, that means that segment HY is also 10. Well, if I know that this is 7, I'm going to also know that this is 7. So since the triangles are congruent, I know that the parts of the triangles are congruent. So now looking at the angles, if I know that this is 20, and angle A is going to correspond with angle H, that means this is 20. Well, that means if this is 30, that means that this is also going to be 30. And you might stop there because that's all the pieces of the puzzle that they give you, except you have to remember that a triangle, the angles add up to 180 degrees. So since we know that the angles will add up to 180, we can find angle C. And so we minus the 50. X equals 130 degrees. So that means that this here is going to be 130 degrees. And that means that this will be 130 degrees. Now my triangles are never drawn to scale, so even though that looks like an acute triangle, since we did the math, we now know it's actually an obtuse triangle. So you might be wondering, well, what about that CPCTC thing? Well, that's what we just did. The C CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So since we said these triangles are congruent, that means all the parts have to be congruent. So the yellow has to be equal to the yellow, the green has to be equal to the green, and so on. So hope this helps.